Office hours are super laid back. I've got zero content planned, which is a refreshing feeling for me. Just a chance to ask any questions that you have throughout the week, any questions that, you felt were tangential in class, any questions about what's coming up. Just open door policy kind of for anything you may have question wise.
I had a question about Trello.
Sure.
Is there a way to delete a card?
Yes, if you open the card over on the right hand side, there should be a button to either archive or delete, and then that's how you should be able to get rid of it.
Okay, I saw the archive, but I wasn't sure if that was just like saves your past cards or if that would get rid of it
Yeah,
altogether.
you they the way to think about archive in Trello land is essentially move to recycle bin, where like when you delete something, that's really you archive it, and then the cards go in an archive list, and then you can permanently delete it once it's in the archive. But the reason they have archive instead of delete is a lot of teams use Trello, and they don't want something to accidentally get deleted without any way of recovering it. So instead of calling it delete, they call it archive. And if you like really want to get rid of it, you can go into like the menu of the board and see archived cards and then delete it permanently from there. But once you archive it, it's fine to just leave it as an archived item, and it will be off your board and effectively be deleted.
Okay, because yeah, I have I'm getting the hang of creating a card and what task go. So I've got a lot of cards that I don't need to have anymore. I've broken the task down or included that card in something else.
Yep, and that's a very natural process. So yeah, it's fine to just archive it, and unless you're specifically digging around trying to get back archive cards, that will effectively be deleted.
Good, thank you.
No problem. Other questions?
My question was about the pre-code camp that we read about.
Yes.
So, how much of that should we be doing?
At the moment, none. We will be starting to use that as supplemental material and homework for next week. So the general thinking there is that we will be doing exercises in class, and you'll kind of get exposure to that material. And then the homework for next week will include free code camp exercises, and it will say, "Hey, get these 5 or 10 free code camps done." And it should all be a review of the material that we're covering in class. So Free Code Camp is an awesome resource, and if you feel like you're not at capacity with class stuff and you want to go do extra work, Free Code Camp is awesome to go through and go through those activities. But the homework will be clearly defined in Free Code Camp in terms of, hey, we already covered this in class, so here are the exercises that you should be able to do. And then if you want to do above and beyond that, that's completely fine. I don't want to discourage that, but it will not be required. The only things that will be required will be listed out in assignments for next week.
Oh, So, I went in there and I started doing stuff. So I
Completely
was just
fine.
trying to want to see what it looked interesting. So I wanted to see what it was about. So I just wanted to because uh, I asked the TA, but then she told me to ask you, but I figured I could ask you today. But then last night I was like, oh, let me see what this is about, and so I started playing around with it.
Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen just so there's context here. So, our curriculum roughly covers responsive web design, which is like all front end work, right? This is HTML and CSS essentially. Um, JavaScript algorithms and data structures, this is kind of like intro to computer science. We will definitely be touching on some of this. The front end development library certification, this should just be called React, and we definitely cover React in our curriculum. We don't do a ton of data visualization, but we will certainly touch on back end development and APIs. Um, And then we don't really touch on anything else here, although this is a new certification, the relational database one, which we may end up pulling some resources into our curriculum from. Again, that list is responsive web design, JavaScript algorithms, front-end development, and back-end development are the four that our curriculum touches on the most. So if you have already completed some of the assignments in those four, there is a pretty decent chance that you will actually have homework done before we have even assigned the homework. And that's completely fine. We never want to discourage you from working ahead. But Free Code Camp is one of my favorite coding resources to learn how to code. And the reasoning behind that is because it's very hands-on, right? It's not, oh, go listen to us lecture for a couple hours and then figure it out. It's, hey, here's a little snippet of information. Go apply that information. Okay, did you pass all the tests on that? If you got that code working, okay, here's the next snippet of information. Now go directly apply that. And that's kind of based off of the content that we taught in the first week. That's very hard to make hands-on. But from this point forward, because we'll be doing more technical work, a lot of the work we'll be doing, you'll actually be coding along with me in class, or you'll have the opportunity to go try that out before we move on to the next subject. So I tried to align my teaching style with Free Code Camp's curriculum and exercise style. But those four certifications that are broken up into 300 hours each are kind of like hammering home the same curriculum that we're teaching in Careers in Code. So definitely a great resource to use. And for the homework assignments, I may even assign a couple assignments and then tag on like additional ones that are totally optional, but if you want to keep going, you can. So don't want to stop you if you're on a roll in Free Code Camp, like continue to keep going there. And you'll find that we'll be touching on those same concepts in class starting on Monday.
Yeah, because when we did the assessment, I liked the Code Academy. Like I liked the HTML. We did the bear. So that when I saw that that's what it was, I was like, oh, this same thing. So I just thought it was interesting and I was bored. So I was like, let me touch. But so you pointed out the four. I don't want to get too far ahead, but I also would like to, I mean, I just said that being that I'm laid off right now, I would rather do more now. And then potentially if something happens where I have to go back to work, I would at least have some stuff done. So that was kind of I just wanted to make sure I didn't want to go ahead and I didn't want to be doing too much, but.
Nope, completely fine. As long as you're in one of those four that I laid out, that is very much aligned with our curriculum. What a lot of students find is that they get through front end, and because we have the prep work and because we have Free Code Camp, they get through front end and they're like, what are they scaring us for? This is easy, right? Like, why do they call this a boot camp? And then we go, okay, great, you're done with front end. Now let's go into computer science. And they're like, all right, this is a little harder. This is variables and feels a little bit more like math or like algorithms. And like, this is more finicky. The computer, has to get it exact, where HTML, I could be like, oh, that looks good enough, right? And then we go from there and just really turn up the heat, right? And we're like, great, now that you've got JavaScript and HTML and CSS, let's go build an app. And a lot of students are like, what do you mean go build an app? And it's like, well, no, you've got all the concepts, you've got the foundation laid, like, you've got everything you need, let's go. And it's like, okay, now all of a sudden this feels like a boot camp. We're going really fast, and I'm watching you make all of these things, and I'm just struggling to keep up with it. And that's completely fine, right? Because you'll get to the end of the boot camp and we are no child left behind, right? We are making sure that through one-on-ones you're staying up with things. And you may come into a one-on-one and say, I'm bored. I've got nothing else to do. I've got all my homework done. I'm bored. At which point, my job becomes, all right, let me go find you resources. Maybe let's find a way to get you accelerated in the curriculum. Let's go find other interests. That's completely fine. So the one-on-ones are really all over the spectrum. Sometimes I have one-on-ones with students and they're like, I didn't get anything from the past week. Can you try and reteach that to me? And, I'll try and break it down another way or explain it differently or whatever. But I have also had one-on-ones with, I don't know, maybe the top 20% of the class, and they're just like, go faster, right? Like, I need you on 2x. Like give me more, right? And so I have experience coming in and finding more resources for that student, or suggesting some project work they can do for their portfolio, or redirecting somewhere else. So I would say wait until the end of next week. And if you're still feeling like you're, looking for more resources and things are going too slow, definitely bring that up on one-on-ones. But I think starting next week, you'll start feeling the pace of class just naturally change a little bit.
Yeah, I just have more free time. Most people are like, they're going to work and they come home. So I'm home and I'm like going to the gym and going to Starbucks. So I was just in between time, there's something that, get my self, and I like hands-on. So that was why I said I like that. The thing too was that it said, the instruction said to go in order, and I had to do some stuff. I know you'll go over this when it's time, but I had to do some stuff and make so my name would show and change some stuff. Okay, so yeah, but it did say go in order, so I've been going in order. I would never. I'm comfortable with a little bit comfortable with HTML, but I would never be doing that other. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I'm going in sequence.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
and part of the beauty of our curriculum is that not only is it me coming in and teaching it with 10 years of professional experience, our curriculum has been taught 2 times already. And the way we built our curriculum was soliciting feedback from the entire upstate New York community. So we had probably 25 professional developers from at least 10 different companies come in and just say, like, I may not have time to teach, or I would like to teach later on, but this is an awesome program. We believe in this program. What's your curriculum? And, Jesse and Doug, from the very beginning of this program, made sure that we were building this around the upstate New York community, which of course is a, representative of development across the whole country as well. It's not like Syracuse uses like one programming language that no one's ever heard of outside of Syracuse, but we really made sure that our curriculum was informed and got a lot of feedback from professional developers. And a lot of it will overlap with Free Code Camp, which is why I've got no problems with you like running wild on that. And Free Code Camp will even cover topics that we may not get into that will be helpful for you to know, but aren't like a key crucial part for you to land a job, right? I think one of those things is accessibility. Making a website so it's accessible is super important. And it's Dana McMullen, who was a graduate from the first cohort of Careers in Code. That's her job full time, is helping with accessibility and making sure that they are up to the legal standards, to make sure that people who may be, colorblind or hard of seeing or using screen readers or she helps consult with companies to make sure that they are up to accessibility standards. But that's one of those things where it's like, it's not critical for you to get a job and know all of the accessibility stuff. But at the same time, if that's where you find a particular interest, you could make that your full-time job easily. And so I think Free Code Camp is really good at exposing you to those things. And as we get into the curriculum, you'll definitely find us linking to homework assignments over in Free Code Camp. But the whole idea is back to the C1, do one, teach one model. And the C1 is, hey, you're going to come into class and you're going to see me do it. Do one is part of homework in Free Code Camp, and also your capstone a little bit, which we'll get to in week 5. And then teach one is being able to take your capstone and actually be able to present it, right? Teach one as you're learning in a boot camp is a harder thing to do. But that teach one really comes out when you're interviewing for jobs and you're getting technical questions and trying to explain sometimes technical concepts to non-technical people. And so Laura will be able to come in and help with that. And we've got a whole practice interview program with both local employers and with instructors and mentors for the program to hit home kind of what we consider the soft skills of regular communication and what you would normally get in an interview, and then also what they call the whiteboard interview, where it's like, hey, write out this code, or here's this problem, how do you go about solving it? Which is the scariest thing to do, but something that we try and prep you for in the practice interview so that you're prepared when you hit the job force.
Okay.
Sorry, the warning that I should give at the beginning of office hours is if you ask a question, you're guaranteed to get at least a 2-minute answer, because I love to ramble and office hours is my chance to get it out.
Well, because it was interesting, I thought that other people knew because it was interesting to me. So and then I bought this book because I looked up books, and this was like on the top 10 list of books, and I started reading it, and the guy is actually from Rochester, and he
cool.
And he went to RIT. So
the thing that I find about learning resources, whether they're books, whether they're websites, whether they're courses online, is that they tend to be very polarizing, right? And within the first 15 minutes of reading the book or going through the website or watching the course, it's like, you're like, oh my God, I hate this. Like, this is not my learning style. Or you get into it and you're like, hallelujah, where has this been? Like, this is exactly what I needed to get this content. And so definitely reach out. The nice thing is most of our TAs have been through the program and have used those resources. And I will say, if you're going through a resource and you're like, I can't stand Free Code Camp, Max, please help me find another way to learn this, we will find an alternative that works for you, right? But I'm not a book learner. That's just, so I don't have a recommendation for books, but I know Karen has spent several $100 at Barnes & Noble on programming books, and some of them were her light bulb moments where, like, reading it from the book is what made her get it, right? So, like, never be afraid to ask for more resources. Just because the one that I picked is the one that, I think is best going to teach this concept does not necessarily mean it's going to work for all of the students. And we've done a lot of soul searching, so to speak, on like what makes careers in code different from any of the major boot camps out there, right? And a lot of these major boot camps have a defined curriculum, and they've got hundreds or even thousands of students going through at the same time. And it's like boot camps, self-paced, self-taught teaching. Here's everything you need. Let us know if you have problems. And if you have problems, there will be a 30-minute office hours once every other week that you can go talk to someone for. And it's like, whoa. That's just not our style of boot camp, right? That's the 12 hours of instruction that you're getting. That's the office hours. That's the one-on-ones. It's like, we know each individual student. We know where you're going to be struggling. We know your personalities. We try to figure out your learning style. Careers in Code benefits from being small. And although we've only run this program twice, we found such success because we get to know you individually, right? And that's why Jesse was like, yeah, lead instructor doesn't cover it for your job title, right? It's like, yeah, you're instructing 12 hours a week, but also you're the key relationship with the students. You understand where they're at in their education. You understand, hey, I may be falling behind in assignments, but at the same time, you might have something going on personally. You may not have the time to invest in it. But if you're reaching out and communicating with me and the whole Hack Upstate staff and really trying, we're just not going to fail you out and say, all right, go away now, give us back the laptop. We're going to work with you, because if you're really putting in that effort, we want to return that, right? We want to try and amplify that, and whatever you can put into the program, we're going to try. And there's some people who get in the program and go through it for 3 weeks and go, this just isn't for me. But because we have been refining that application process, I think we've done a better job at catching those students earlier on, so that when you do make it through to this program, and it's a fairly long application process, right? It's not like we ask you to fill in a couple things and be done. We the technical assessment, all the prep work, the several rounds of interviews, the file and folder management, right? Like, we don't just let anyone into this program. So if you've made it in, we've really identified something in you of, hey, I think you can make it through this 6 months. And so that's the biggest thing I can push is, like, just talk to us, right? That's why we require a one-on-one at least every other week, because we want to make sure that we're hitting the expectations and making sure that we can amplify any level of success that you're having.
Yeah, and also with me, I could show you my bookshelf. I have a bunch of books that I've bought because I have an Amazon issue, and they're just sitting there. But this book, it's interesting because it talks about he's a professor, so he's just talking about different aspects. So it kind of gives you a bird's eye view of coding. So that was the part that I like, because he doesn't start talking about HTML until like way into the book.
Yes.
But he's talking about his career and different things. So it was interesting because he's just getting another perspective of it makes it more personal. Like it gave a personal aspect of it. So
absolutely.
And I'm willing to share the book too, because I know I'm not going to read all of it.
Well, I was going to say, the Slack channel is not meant to be one way, right? Like, don't feel like that Slack channel is only for Jesse and I to send messages out. It is very much to be kind of like that open message board, right? It's a closed community, and that only students and instructors are in it. But at the same time, like, it is not just for Jesse and I. So if you're finding resources that are helpful, like, feel free to share them in the CIC Student C3 chat. And not only will other students be able to see that and, could reach out to you to DM to borrow the book or whatever, but we are trying to be much better in this cohort of taking those resources and including it on an outline, right? So that somewhere when you go back into this and you go, oh, someone recommended a book about HTML, what was it? It's captured somewhere in the outline, right? So that resources list grows, not only for your cohort, but the next cohort coming in can now go through that outline and be like, oh, this book looks like a perfect fit for me. Let me go buy that, or let me go see if the library has that, or whatever it is. So I am one of those people who I take a very specific learning style, and just having options there, I think, is super important. So feel free to share out the book, and don't feel like Slack is locked down in any way. Like, it's meant to be a community.
Okay. I'm muting. I asked my question. I don't want to take. I want someone else to have a chance.
All good. Whole point of office hours is asking questions and dealing with me ranting for another hour of your time. So any other questions people may have?
I did get on a little bit late.
No problem.
My apologies about that. I did want to ask, did I miss anything like really important in those last 15 minutes? Or
nope. Office hours are always meant to be optional, and it's no big deal joining in late. Nothing super important that you missed. Everything's kind of in the assignments. Doug had a question about Trello and archiving things, and Christy was asking questions about resources and Free Code Camp, which is a really awesome resource that we'll be diving into next week. A lot of learning resources I find are not free, especially in coding. But I think Free Code Camp is a shining beacon in terms of, you could complete 3 or 4 of them. And I know people who have done this, who have gone through completely self-taught, gone through free code camp, built the confidence that they needed, and applied to full stack jobs and gotten them. And so free code camp is tough because if you get stuck, oftentimes there aren't people that you can reach out to ask the question, or because it's such a big community, it's easy for your question to get lost in the sea of questions. But at the same time, they're such a great resource that you'll starting next week find that we'll be leaning on them for assignments as well. So that's just basically been the recap of the past half hour or so.
So on the free code camp, there was something that I did and I couldn't figure out what I did, and it has a help thing, and so I watched a video, and then the person was talking through the video, and I didn't put, I think it was either the slash or it was like an equal, so it was something small that I didn't do. So I watched the video, and then you can get a hint. So there's a couple things there that can help you. Next question. So say the first one, say that I finished that and then I complete all of it and then I do the assessments. Is that something that I could put on my portfolio?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So if you make it, so I would say you don't want to put like individual exercises on your portfolio,
Right.
but
The
you could definitely put the certification, and that's something that's resume worthy. Of you can do a certification section and put in free code camp, front end development course or whatever they call it. And then I will say that free code camp has changed a lot since I've started using it 5 years ago, very much for the better. But they used to have a project section as well. So like not individual challenges, but like, hey, go build the game of life, which is like this visual animation that like, cells replicate and cells die, and you can kind of see all of that. I think they used to have a calculator project that we'll be doing as part of our curriculum. But kind of the way they used to have it set up is there were like modules inside of each of the certifications, and then when you got to the end of a module, they would have a couple projects you could do. So those individual projects are definitely portfolio worthy. We should have enough projects throughout the curriculum where your portfolio won't feel light, but at the same time, if you've spent, I don't know, more than 10 hours or more than a day roughly on a project, you're nearing that threshold of being portfolio project worthy, and is definitely something that you can use to put on your portfolio. Any other questions? Sometimes office hours end early. That's completely fine. Sometimes they go for well over an hour and people are begging for me to find duct tape to put over my mouth. So whatever happens, silence is fine.
I had a question about when you had free code camp up on your screen. You mentioned data visualization is not something that we'll get deeply into, but could you just explain what is data visualization?
Yeah, great question. So we oftentimes hear this term called big data, and big data just means data that has grown so large that a table doesn't summarize it anymore, right? So the basic or the easiest thing that you can tie to data visualization is getting into an Excel spreadsheet and you just make a pie chart or a bar graph or a scatter plot or any of those. You are now visualizing data, right? Whether that's data where you're taking an average of a budget, whether that's data where you're tracking spend over a couple months, whether that's something as complex of understanding how Twitter networks cause the most number of likes to happen for a particular tweet with a particular hashtag, right? Like you can go way down this data analysis and data visualization. So two separate fields. Data analysis is all about, hey, we've got, thousands or millions or sometimes even billions of rows of data in our database. How can we take something that is that large of a data set and turn data into information, right? And the difference there is data is just raw actions, raw data sets, right? this user has sent this many tweets and this is the content of the tweet, and that just goes into the data set. Information is, because we've got all of their individual tweets, we can look at this user and say, hey, this user is in technology and they care about the environment because, they use these certain hashtags, or they follow these people, or, oh, this guy's a Tesla fanboy because he follows Elon Musk. And because we have that information, we can then make something actionable from it, right? So, this is kind of one of the things that the company I work at does, is working on turning data sets into information, right? Taking sometimes thousands of rows of data and figuring out how to analyze that data in a way to actually make a difference on that end user. And so that's kind of the difference between data and information. Data analysis is all about taking that data, making it and converting it into something that's actionable information. Data visualization is along the same lines of, hey, we've got large data sets, right? Look at all of the data that's collected from the census. That's way too much information for a human to absorb, but if we visualize that in some way, it can become actionable. So that's all about charting information. Sometimes that's using mapping. You could use heat maps. You could use, right, anything that is taking raw data and making a graphic out of it is what data visualization is. So we won't be spending a ton of time on data visualization, but that's one of those things that some people kind of get intrigued by, and they go down that rabbit hole and they learn all about data visualization. And that is any one of the certifications on Free Code Camp, you could easily make a full-time job out of, right? You could easily make a career out of. And so that's part of the beauty of the boot camp, is exposing you to several different fields. And if you come out of the boot camp and go, I know you tried to make me a full stack JavaScript developer, but I fell in love with working with the database and I want to go be a database engineer, we consider that a success of the program. If you get through this whole program, you get your certificate at the end, you graduate, and you go, all of that was super interesting, but what I actually loved doing all of those projects was managing the projects and breaking it down into pieces, and I want to go be a project manager. That's a huge success for us, because now you're going to go become a project manager somewhere, but you're going to have contextual information about the project you're managing. You're going to understand what it takes to do those tasks that you're assigning people, right? And so, we consider any success of this program of if you went out and got a career in any tech or tech adjacent field. So just because you come out and you're not a full stack developer, if you got a job in something else, that is completely fine with us, right? Like, the job title that we're teaching for definitely is junior full stack developer. That's going to be the closest alignment to our curriculum. But sometimes you get through the whole curriculum and find a piece of that curriculum that you like the most. And that's completely fine to kind of follow that career path and go somewhere different. But yes, data visualization, super interesting. The good news is most data visualization is done in JavaScript. There's a super popular library called D3, the letter D, the number 3, and then .js. And that's all about taking large data sets and finding ways to visualize them. The other thing that I would encourage you to look at is the New York Times has an award-winning data visualization team, where they have paired up with authors of stories and said, hey, this is a story that's got a lot of data behind it, and all of the things that the trends that you're writing about are backed up with data. So can we help you kind of do a digital version of this article to make that data not only visualized, but also more interactive? So if you just do a search for New York Times data visualization, you can get a better idea of what visualization looks like of data sets. But oversimplifying them is it's just about taking thousands of rows of data and making a chart out of it. But the oversimplification of that is it doesn't just have to be a chart. It can be very interactive, and can really help you understand something that your brain just can't hold thousands of rows of information, but it can understand a visualization.
I have a question. Um, I've done the wireframe and I've done a mock-up, and I know the next sequence would be the prototype. I think I'm having a hard time connecting some concepts that I learned in Free Code Camp to where they would fit with the prototype.
Okay.
So I have a question, like, is there an in-between step to where, like, let's say when I was looking at my mock-up, I knew that I needed to connect an image, right? And automatically in my head, I'm like seeing that I need to do like href or whatever that is. I can't just tell you off the bat, but I'm saying, is there an in-between phase where you're writing like half of the code onto the prototype to know that that's what it has to be?
Yeah, so the prototype step wouldn't be doing the href, right? Because that's the href is the part that you get into for the actual coding. So you're completely right of like, if I'm putting a link in and if I click on that link, I want to go to this other screen, you're totally right. You would use an NA tag, which stands for anchor tag in your HTML. And that's kind of step 4, right? So wireframe, mockup, prototype, code. And then the last step would be testing and deployment. And now we're kind of bordering on software development lifecycle, right? But I think you're skipping over step 3, which is that prototype, and trying to relate the following step, which is the coding step, and that's where you're kind of losing things. So in InVision, it's a very iterative process, right? So InVision is a terrible tool for making wireframes and mockups. They've tried to get better at that, but it's a great tool for importing your mockups and then making those mockups interactive. And by making them interactive, they essentially become a prototype. And so the InVision tool would help you take those mockups, break them up into separate screens or pages or artboards, or I'm not quite sure what InVision calls them. But essentially, what InVision excels at is importing in your mockups, making them breaking up your mockups into separate pages, and then breaking your mockups down even further from there into separate components. And once you have those components, that's when you can start saying, hey, this component is going to link to this other page. Okay. And so when you're in InVision, there will be somewhere in the user interface that you can click a little link button, and it's going to say, sure, where would you like to link this to? And you're going to pick your other screen that it links to. And then when you go into essentially presentation mode in PowerPoint, there should be some like run button or some test button in InVision. But when you click on that, that's when you're going to start to see your home screen. And if you click on that component that you've turned into a link, it should actually link you to that other screen.
Okay, so that's what I need, the prototype function, because in my mind, I'm just like, something is missing here in the in-betweens to get me to connecting to code. So thank you for clarifying that. And then I had one other question, and that's on that same exact assignment, I'm wondering if for instance, for the website that I modeled my page after, it continues to scroll and there are multiple pages. Are we only just doing the first main home page, or are we modeling it after the entire website?
Great question. So you are modeling it after however many scroll sections or pages it takes to make sure that you've got all of the content in the requirements document in that assignment, right? So it is up to you, and this is a completely fine thing to do. The one that I modeled it off of had like those 6 sections, but the 6 sections kept scrolling down, right? And so if you clicked on it, it would just scroll the page to that section. I don't really like that. I'm someone who, that's the infinite scroll, or the super long scroll is the more modern way to design web pages. But I'm someone who likes individual pages. When I click on a link, I don't want to be scrolled to that section. I want to be taken to a completely different page. So if you find that that's the case for you, it's completely fine to change up that design. And when we code it out, it will be a little easier to do that, to link to a separate page. But in answer to your question, you should have either every section or every page wireframed, at least wireframed, and then optionally mocked up to make sure that you've got enough screens for each bullet point in the requirements doc. So when you find the About page, well, you may look at the About page and say, well, I can combine the About page and kind of my home page to have all of this information on it. And I could even combine my contact page in to have my email address in the home. And that's fine to merge down sections, but it's also important to look at your portfolio or project section and be like, okay, I need a completely separate page or section for that. So I'm going to design that independently from my homepage section. So it's okay to merge them down, but at the same time, you should have at least a couple sections wireframed out to make sure that you've hit all of the bullet points on that list.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, if you ever find me rambling on for a while and you get to the end and you're like, but you still haven't answered my question, feel free to push back on me and be like, all of that's great information, but I still have my same question, and I'll try and circle back and answer it again.
I have a question.
Sure.
I like your shirt too.
Thank you. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's cool. I like it. With the profiles, like I even tried to Google and like I don't know where to like find these profiles. Like I don't.
Yeah, so other terms you can look for are portfolio websites, resume websites, personal websites, trying to think, yeah, you know, anything, any website that you end up on where you're like, this is not a company website, right? This is a website for, another one you can look at is like, ad agency websites, because ad agencies tend to normally have a portfolio section, and they tend to have a little bit of information about the company. But basically what you're looking for is like a non-app website, right? So I don't want to go on Facebook because Facebook's a web app and it's got information saved in the database and all the user activity. And, you know, I don't want to go on the New York Times either because that's a very specific like news website, right? But any of those search terms should just get you started in terms of if you find a website that you like a lot, even if it's not a portfolio website, but you're like, I really like this design and I can make this design work for my personal website, it's completely fine to model it after that, right? We don't need to do an exact clone of the website. We're just using that as design inspiration. And the real reasoning behind that is it takes, you know, we could do an entire 6-month boot camp solely on UI design and going down color palette principles and understanding the math behind spacing and having consistent spacing on your website. And we could go down, you know, we could easily go down that path, but that's like 6 months to become just a UI designer. And so the challenge of our curriculum is how can we expose you to enough of the curriculum where you get the concept of UI design, but at the same time, you know, you're not going to come out of here and have everything that you need to go start a job as a UI designer. And so that's kind of where I drew the line in the curriculum of, look, I'm not a UI designer. I know enough about UI to teach you how to do a mock-up and teach you how to do a quick wireframe, but I'm not experienced enough to be able to go down and say, like, let's talk about the importance of consistent spacing and how we can figure out the pixel levels, or how we can make a color palette that blends together, or anything like that. And so that's kind of I don't want to say the crutch that I'm leaning on, but saying, hey, let's look at someone else's design and use that as a source of inspiration for our own design. And by the way, my website, the Max Matthews with a .ws, that is totally someone else's website that I just modified to make my own, right? And if you go to the credits, I even link to the place that I found that template, and then just, made it to work for me. Originally, it was a photography website, I think, and I'm like, I don't want this for photography, but I know enough about design to still make it look good, and make it my own. And so that's what we're kind of shooting for. Even if you do a search for example websites, I think you'll find enough examples where you can say, this is the design that I like, even if the content isn't an exact match.
Okay, thank you, Max.
And I, by the way, am making transcripts of all of the recordings. And I'll post the office hours not only just for the video link, but the transcripts can be super helpful. If you just jot down like the time I answer a question, you can just jump to the transcripts and see, exactly what I said, which tends to be a little bit easier than like fast forwarding through the video and having me at 2x and forgetting where I answered it. And the transcripts are nice just because they're a little bit more searchable. So I will post links for that as well. Any other questions you guys may have? And questions, by the way, can also be like future looking. If you're looking at the overall syllabus and you're like, I've got no idea what's coming up, or like what's, next week's topic, or, these office hours are meant to be completely open for whatever you guys may have questions about.
Are you a Syracusean now?
I am not yet. So I've spent almost a decade in Syracuse. I came up to SU in 2012 and spent 3 years at SU. And then I moved to downtown Syracuse and started working at the company that I'm still at. And then I moved to Tip Hill, and then to East Syracuse, and then to North Syracuse. So I have definitely been around the Syracuse area. I have an accepted home offer on a house in Manlius and should be closing hopefully by the end of May, but we are trying to get that date moved up as quickly as possible. So I am just pending like mortgage approval and the final like appraisal and all of that stuff. The house buying process went from nuts 4 years ago, 5 years ago when I bought my last house to absolutely insane of people. I had one home offer that was accepted, and I said, hey, can we get 15 minutes in the house? Like, I FaceTime through the house. I like the house. I put in the offer, and they said no. And I'm like, okay, well, you can either let me in and have a small chance of me backing out of the house, or completely refuse to let me in, and you're 100% guaranteed for me to back out of the deal. And they said, we don't feel comfortable with you coming into the house.
Oh, wow. That's weird.
And it was like, I'm about to go spend $250,000 here, and you're telling me I can't come into the house for 15 minutes to see it?
That's odd.
So, house buying process is absolutely insane, as is all housing right now across the country in terms of rentals and all of that. But I am trying as soon as possible to be a Syracusean again. I spent the past year and a half trying out different areas. Like, I had nothing anchoring me to Syracuse when I left the area, and spent a year and a half figuring out that Syracuse is exactly where I wanted to come back to and kind of put down more roots. So super excited to do that with Careers in Code and all of that.
And your and one more question. In your time in coding, how many of your jobs were remote? Have you worked any remote jobs ever?
Yes, I have. So our company was founded in Syracuse and is still based in the Syracuse area. we were in person for the first 3 years, roughly. And we got to the point that my boss and I were coming into the office, and we were the only people at the company at the time. And we would come in and put in headphones and have entire conversations over Slack and then go home. And it was like, why are we doing this? You know, like, we're paying for an office space. We prefer to talk over Slack because it's all documented. So when we actually get around to doing that feature, we can like go back up and reread the conversation. Like, we're being dumb here. And so we went fully remote. And then a little over a year later, the pandemic hit. And a lot of software developers were laid off because companies did panic COVID layoffs, and they thought, oh, engineers get paid the most and they're working on features that we won't need for at least another year. Let's lay them off.
Right.
And so we were at the point in the company where we were expanding and hiring developers and scooped a bunch of developers up. And a lot of the developers were asking us, like, hey, about this whole remote thing, our company did it very poorly. And, we're worried about losing that lack of community and feeling like we're part of a work culture. And we were able to say, like, hey, we've been remote for a year, since before the pandemic, and they were like, well, what tools do you use? And it's like, well, we were using Zoom before Zoom was like a requirement to work, like, we're set up in Slack, and here's our company culture, and we've got a virtual happy hour. And, we were able to list all of that off, and employees really jumped on that. So I've been fully remote for almost 5 years now. And I've been fortunate that my boss is like, tell me where to send the paycheck, like, it's just direct deposit anyway. Just tell me what your address is, and I'll use that. So I definitely have experience working remotely. And then, I have been in person as well. And one of the programs that I get to work on through Hack Upstate Connections is this Surge Apprenticeship program. Which is really designed for either bootcamp graduates, so, any CIC graduate, anyone with a 2-year or 4-year college degree in computer science or IT, and then also anyone who's got like a certificate coming out of college that may not be an associate's or bachelor's degree, but basically someone who has some exposure to computer science. This apprenticeship program is a year-long program targeting people who are trying to get a career in tech but don't have one started yet. And so part of that program is great because it's with 8 local employers, and I've had conversations with their CTOs or their hiring managers or technical leads, and trying to assess what their needs are, right? Trying to figure out, hey, what's your ideal candidate, and how can we train someone who's got tech experience but not necessarily career experience, and bridge the gap there so that when they do come in, they're not fresh off the boat, so to speak, and they, have at least a little bit of an intro there. And so covering interesting things like, hey, before we went virtual, like, I didn't know how to use Zoom, or like, calendar invites are a foreign thing to me. What do you mean we accept an invite and it's recurring and you can put it, all of that stuff we're trying to just touch on as part of this apprenticeship. So when you come in, the etiquette around sharing a Google Doc and making sure people have access to it, right? And hey, how do I stay organized? How do I make sure that I'm continuing to learn and have the resources that I need, but at the same time, I'm not pestering my employer and making sure that I can learn on my own, but know when to go to a mentor and ask those questions.
Right.
And so it's interesting because there's a lot of overlap between that apprenticeship program and Careers in Code. But we very much have our finger on the pulse in terms of the job market, and hopefully incorporate as much of that as we can into our curriculum.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. Now that you said that, I think that is great that we do the off and on, like 1 week, because the week we have to go there to the common space is like the week you'd have to go into work. And then being at home is the week that you are allowed to work remotely. So it gives you I just came from a totally remote job, and I didn't miss the office culture at all. I loved it. But my other question was, is Slack like, is Slack similar to Zoom or Microsoft Teams?
It's more similar to Microsoft Teams than it is to Zoom.
Okay.
So Zoom is video calling only and video meetings.
Mhm.
Slack supports video calls built into Slack, but it totally depends on what your company's IT department has decided. So Slack and Microsoft Teams are pretty much the de facto ones in the market. There are other ones out there, and some workspaces will use like Google Chat, and just use like tools built into the Gmail Google Workspace.
Mhm.
But Slack is definitely the biggest name, with Microsoft Teams catching up very rapidly. But in terms of like workplace IM or workplace text communications outside of email, Slack and Microsoft Teams are the biggest two names there. Some companies will use Slack video calls internally, but Zoom is a other competitors to Zoom. The list is a little bit longer, but Zoom is definitely the biggest name. Google Meet is probably the second biggest because it's built into Google for Workspace, and that's what a lot of companies will host their email through. Teams tries to get into the Zoom territory, just like Slack tries to get into the Zoom territory. Um, Cisco had one. I think they own GoToMeeting, which used to be big before the pandemic, for remote meetings, and then they struggled to scale as well as Zoom did because Zoom had been built and architected around AWS, Amazon Web Services,
Mhm.
and because they had invested into that before the pandemic, they were able to scale up much better than a lot of other video providers.
Right.
But there's definitely like a Venn diagram overlap there between like, hey, Slack has video calls built in, and then Zoom is only for video calls, but like Zoom isn't I'm sorry, Slack video calls aren't robust enough that we could like host class on it every night and, make sure that we've got security set up properly and have multiple people calling in and still being able to manage all of that. So, I think someone mentioned Notion the other night, and Notion versus Trello, and that's kind of the same thing, right? Like Notion is good at project management, but because it's kind of a jack of all trades, it's not great at doing project management. And it may be good enough for you to do project management in, but Trello is, because that's a purpose built tool for project management, it does it better. Same thing for Slack. Slack is great for text communications and it can do video calls, but because Zoom is purposely built for video calls, it does it better. And so it's similar space and all in communication collaboration, but not necessarily exactly the same.
You know what? I think I asked the wrong question. So where does Canvas fall in? Because I'm trying to figure out, because I learned Teams. I learned Teams off of YouTube. So I'm just trying to figure out what, like, should we or could we be like watching some YouTube to maybe get a better understanding? But I think I asked the wrong question. I think I meant to ask you, was Canvas like Teams and not Slack?
So Canvas is a whole separate category. Canvas is the category is learning management systems, or LMS, and
Mm-hmm.
Canvas is close to like Blackboard or Google Classroom.
Okay. I got you. I definitely am familiar with Blackboard. Okay,
Okay,
Canvas is like Blackboard. Slack is like Microsoft Teams.
you got it.
Okay. 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 I'm good now. I got it.
Yeah, we used Google Classroom in the first two cohorts, and I was screaming from the mountaintops about how much I hated it.
Mhm.
I love Google. I love Google products. I would not be able to do my job without Google products, let alone Google search results. Um, Google Classroom is like any UX designer worked on the team and instantly quit because it was that terrible. It there's nothing wrong with it on the surface until you try and use it, either as a student or as a teacher, and then you're like, this makes absolutely no sense. What do you mean I just graded everything and my students can't see the grade? and it's just like weird things where you have to know, like, this is just a quirky thing about Google, but then the list of quirky things is like 100 items long, and so you can't keep them all in your head. And so we switched over to Canvas, and Canvas is like everything I hoped a learning management system would be, and a central resource for for resources, and an easy place to link out to for outlines, and a place to submit assignments, and like everything that you would hope a virtual class would have. Canvas does really well. And so we do a weekly retrospective of like, we do it internally for instructors and Jesse and the TAs, and we kind of report out like what went well this week, what didn't go well this week. We take all of your feedback from that 30-second feedback form and try and incorporate that into it. We generate our action items of, hey, what do we need to do next week to address what didn't go well? And one of the first section, Jesse was like, oh, fill in this section when you get a chance. And it was like, what went well? And I'm like, Canvas, like major upgrade. Like, thank God we're using Canvas now, like, and so great question. But yeah, we've got learning management systems. We've got, Slack for like virtual collaboration and messaging. And then we've got Zoom for our video meetings. And that's a part of any project kickoff, right? Not just necessarily a classroom where we have to say, oh, we need a learning management system. But that's something that when you're designing a new app, you have to say, hey, what are we going to be using here? What database are we going to be using? What server are we going to be using? What front-end library are we going to be using? And we'll be touching on that as we get into those categories in the curriculum of like, we picked React, and here, before we learn React, let me justify to you why React is part of our curriculum. And then when you go into a company, if it's a small enough company, you may not be being hired as just the developer. You may be hired as the general IT person who knows about computers. And IT and computer development and software development and engineering are two very different departments. But sometimes there is a misassociation there of, oh, because you're a developer, you must be good at IT. And that is definitely not always the case. But you may be leaned on to say like, hey, we just went fully virtual, or we've been surviving virtually over the past year and a half roughly, but all we're doing is using email. And there's got to be a system out there that's better than email. So sometimes you will do a whole comparison and look at MS Teams and look at Slack and look at Zoom and come up with a presentation for your boss of, hey, here are the tools I recommend, here are the other tools, here's the pricing breakdown, and kind of doing all of that.
Yeah, so full transparency for me, I was nervous because when you started sending those things and it was like Slack and Canvas and you were saying all these things, I was like, well, so here we go. But I've worked, remotely. So now that you've broken it down, I feel way better because now I have something to compare each of them to. I thought that I had, kind of become the queen of working remote. And then you started sending me all these other links. I was like, oh my God, here we go all over again. But now I feel better now. I feel way better now because now I'm like, I get the comparisons and what. So I was like, you're too old to keep starting over now. You can start over a couple times, but come on now.
So that's a great note, and something that I'm actually going to add into our improvement list for this week is like explaining the tools instead of just sending links to all of them.
Because I like to watch YouTube and kind of get, once you know what something is, you kind of learn more about it. And I was like, oh my God, I'm like, this is a lot of stuff, but it makes sense. And I didn't even understand Notion. I had no idea that had anything to do with project management. I do something way different in Notion. So had no clue, but here we are. All the newness.
Any other questions while I'm jotting down that note? I know we're almost at time. I've got a couple minutes. If there are any other questions, if not, I appreciate you guys all attending. Hopefully you have
Thank
a
you,
great
Max.
weekend and have fun on assignments. I've seen some of you start to trickle in one-on-ones, which is great. I'm super excited for. Um, but yeah, if any questions come up over the weekend, never hesitate to ping me in Slack. It may be a slightly longer response than the typical 9 to 5 workday, but I definitely will respond to everyone. So if any questions pop up, feel free to hit me up. And if you get to an assignment where you're just like, I've got no idea what he's talking about, there's no way I'm going to get this done by Sunday, just shoot me a message, right? Like, there is no penalty for getting in assignments late. Your weekly rubric score, your weekly feedback score may be a little lower, but as you get the assignments submitted, if they're late, I'll boost that score back up when the assignments come in. So don't want you to panic. Just a general reminder that if you see a grade on something and it's a 66%, that means that you met expectations and you did everything right. So don't panic when you see a 2 out of 3 on something. That just means that you're meeting expectations. Very, very few assignments do I give a 3 out of 3 on, and that's like you went way above and beyond. Like, you took your wireframes and did not only mock-ups, but mock-ups on all 6 pages, right? Or like, there's no brownie points or bonus points or whatever for like hitting that 3 out of 3. It's just a chance for me to say like, hey, you really knocked it out of the park on this assignment. So that's the only reason why it's like the 3 out of 3 is the bonus point, the extra credit. But if you're hitting 2 out of 3, that means you're doing everything great and you're right on track. Awesome. Well, you guys have a great weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday. And
Thank you,
reminder,
Max.
class is all virtual on Monday, so do not come into Common Space.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.